person who will get a permit?
So, I mean, the hurdles to overcome, I don't think there's significant hurdles. I think, you know, it's a change for us in the district, and the big, you know, concern, as I've said all along, is really not crime. It is just the high security level we have here with all the dignitaries and, you know, large special events. So I think we'll get through that fine. The average person, so the law has been passed as an emergency, so there's still going to be some, it is the law right now, there still will be some revisions to it, I imagine, to the permanent law. And the law sets forth guidelines as to who could be considered. So if you have some legitimate, valid reason to ask for a permit, you're under threat, you have a job that requires you to carry large amounts of valuables that would put you at risk. And so now what has happened is we're finishing rulemaking, so the lawyers are all together and with the legislators, and they're putting together the rules, because now there has to be rulemaking done. That's where we are. And, you know, I get to hear, you know, and listen to that daily. It's interesting. I think about a room full of lawyers. No offense to the lawyers in the room. And then so those rules will go into place, and we will start accepting applications. But remember, both the rules and the legislation are both emergency, so there probably will be some changes to it down the road. But I think right now it's modeled very much after New York and Maryland and New Jersey. And so if you look at what their laws are for concealed carry permits, it's going to be very similar to that. I can't tell you what the final is going to be, but it's going to be very similar.
I have this feeling that I'm not sure I can defend it. That as a citizen, I might prefer that we make people carry guns openly so we know who's armed.
There was a lot of debate about that, and and even from police officers, we had to change the think through it too. As a change in the policing model we dealt with for many years. But I think the goal is for people to not only be safe, but to feel safe in their community. And I'm not sure people in Washington D.C. would feel settled and safe with people walking around with guns visible. I think that was kind of the best that we used ultimately to say concealed carry is better.
Well, we could have a situation where somebody could have a concealed carry permit and be stoned, because we might the voters might approve on November 4th the marijuana. Have you taken a public position? Should you vote for or against the legalization of small amounts of marijuana in the District of Columbia?
So I think the legalization of small amounts of marijuana, this is a lot like the whole gun debate. I think people are very passionate in Washington, D.C. about what they do and don't want in their communities, and there has been a significant shift with the marijuana laws here in the city, and people have spoken and they have voted, and they said they want to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana, and that passed, and now the debate is, do we legalize small amounts of marijuana? It's not much different to us, to policing. So to me, I think the bigger issue with the whole marijuana debate is health issues, not so much the policing issues. It's, quite honestly, law enforcement and the officers haven't done a whole lot of arresting people for small amounts of marijuana in a long time, because the cases really were not prosecuted. So it was, not a good investment of our time. So I don't really have any opposition to what it is the community says they want. The legislators get those votes and they make the laws. As long as the laws are clear to follow, we'll follow.
But it does take a tool out of your tool belt in that officers are no longer allowed to use the odor of marijuana as probable cause, which has oftentimes led them to much bigger items in cars and homes, guns, for instance.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true, but we're not living in the same city we used to live in either. This city is much safer than it used to be. And while officers will tell you that's a tool that we had in our toolbox that got us, lots of guns and large quantities of drugs in the 90s and early 2000s, this is a very different city today. And so, we need to look at the tools that we use and how we use those tools, because in police tactics, partly what is causing a big debate in this country.
And would officers, we've had this discussion, at least I've had this discussion in my office about if it's legal to have marijuana, will my company fire me if they suspect that I've been smoking marijuana?
I don't know, officers can't use marijuana.
Officers cannot.
They cannot, no.
Have you ever answered?
How does that work?
Let me ask, have you ever smoked marijuana before or had marijuana?
Let's just say I grew up in a neighborhood where marijuana smoking was prevalent. I had been around it growing up, in my school growing up. In fact, that's one of the reasons I didn't want my son going to public school, because it was, of course, a different time back then, but very, very common in the schools, and it was hard for kids to get away from it.
Always like smoked pot?
So you didn't answer that.
I didn't answer the question, right?
I always feel like reporters should answer the question. I don't mind if my son asks me if I've ever smoked marijuana. I just don't want him to ask me, when was the last time?
So Chief, I'm intrigued now. So if it becomes legal, if the TC Council passes a law and says, you know, marijuana for adults is legal, how then can the police department regulate? I mean, do you regulate whether they're not allowed to drink alcohol?
Well, so there are police departments that don't allow you to smoke cigarettes, right? So it is a disqualifier for you to be a cigarette smoker, and I believe Fairfax County is one of them. So we have standards that we can set for the hire of police officers, and we can include those things because, you know, of the relevance it has on your ability to do the job. Anything that impairs your cognitive ability is something that we would be concerned about. Is alcohol one of them? No. In a perfect world, abuse of alcohol, if we could, you know, clarify that so that we knew who was, someone who abused alcohol versus, you know, occasionally used alcohol, I wish we could.